going to start what we call EMS operations with Chapter 19, Transport Operations. So in this EMS operations, I'd like to say it's all common sense, but it's maybe getting you out of your safety zone, thinking about how you're going to interact with other agencies, how you're going to handle situations that maybe you don't have the training for or the resources for. So it's mostly knowledge, how to ensure your patient, public, and your personal safety. First off, we're going to start with operating a ground ambulance, and then we're going to talk about air medical transport and your role in setting up a landing zone as well as transferring care of that patient at that landing zone. So to be an effective emergency medical responder, these are things that you have to think about throughout the whole call, that preparation for the call. I had a friend, he was a fire chief, he actually said this, 30 years ago or something. He said, I have a very boring job, thinking about waiting for the call, if you're stationed someplace, very boring call, with periods of excitement and moments of panic. And I always think of that when we think about preparation for the call. You're going to spend a lot of time preparing that call, not knowing when it's going to come in. It may be rereading the book. It may be thinking about, if I had this situation, maybe I need to practice this skill. A lot of times it's checking expiration dates on the ambulance and doing an inventory, cleaning the truck up, ordering supplies, a lot of things behind that preparation for the call. Then we think about dispatch information, then that response. Now we're en route to the scene. Getting on scene, performing that scene size up, taking care of whatever you need to do as far as the patient, transferring that care if you're first responding to other medical personnel, like EMS, or if you're actually transporting, then transferring that care at the hospital, and then your post-run activities. So we think about preparing for a call. First thing is make sure that your vehicle's ready. Nobody wants to have a vehicle break down en route to a real life threatening emergency. So we want to also know our area. Make sure that you know the routes that are available to you. A lot of times on remote sites, it's really, pre-planning, looking at maps, getting good directions to where you're going, and those kind of things. Make sure that you have the proper equipment. So we look at contents of your life support kit. This is maybe something that you should have in your own vehicle. And we've talked about putting a first aid kit or first response kit together before. And these are all things that you can collect and gather and put into something. I always like fishing tackle boxes the best. I can throw other gear on top of it. It's not going to compress and maybe rupture something. But at the BLS level, all this stuff is probably things that you will use from time to time. If you leave it in your vehicle, if it's very hot or very cold, it's going to deteriorate faster than if you kept it someplace that was more climate controlled. We think about dispatch, the information that dispatch is going to give you, and let you think about what kind of call you're going to go to, if you need to take any other resources for you. Some emergency medical dispatchers have pre-arrival information. For instance, how to do mouth-to-mouth resuscitation or CPR. There's a lot of information that dispatch is going to get, but the three most important pieces are the nature of the call. Is it medical? Is it fire? Is it law enforcement needed? And if it's EMS, is it a car accident? And how many people are involved? Is it near drowning? Is it somebody with chest pain? Something about that call to have it in your head, this is what we're going for. It's not always that way, not always a situation when you arrive on scene, but it could be. The location of the patient. Name and location is important. Name is important, but location, you have to know where you're going to. Number of patients, any special problems, and then a callback number. And if I had to just collect three pieces of information, it would be nature of the call, location, and callback number. Because if something is wrong, hey, we're at this residence and nobody's here, nobody's answering the door, and they call them back and they say, oh, no, I made a mistake, I gave you my address and I'm actually at my mother's house. People get excited, they get panicked, and sometimes that happens. All of this is important. Dispatch is going to get so much more than this, and with the enhanced 911, a lot of times you get more information just if they call. So that's always good. En route to the scene, you want to think about getting there quickly but safely. So it's not always the fastest person that wins on this one. You want to have due regard all the time. So think about time of day, any kind of traffic patterns, anything that you should avoid while en route. Always wear your seatbelt. Keep your equipment secured. Use your warning lights, and if needed, your sirens. So you don't have to run one or both or the other. You have to have an operator who understands when operating that vehicle that he or she is responsible not only for the vehicle, not only for the lives inside the vehicle, but potentially everybody else too. So to get people's attention, lights and sirens are good, but that doesn't mean, especially in a very remote area, that you need to run your siren the whole time. It says do not exceed a safe speed. So what's safe? You got to factor in that your ground ambulance and as well as like a response vehicle weighs anywhere from 8 to 12,000 pounds. So the safe stopping distance is much further than, say, your 4,000-pound car. That it's 3 times the weight to be able to stop that. So if you're going 70 miles an hour and it takes you almost a football field to safely stop that vehicle. So you want to think about those things when you're operating it. It's got low ground clearance. It's got a higher roof. The antennas up on top get knocked off. It's wider. Your ambulance is never wider than the mirrors, the side mirrors. But it's got a longer box, so a turning radius that's going to be much longer or wider, as well as you can kind of hit curbs and clip things a lot easier than you can in your own car. So think about safe operations all the way through this. You're expected to get there quickly. The public expects that, but you're also expected not to damage any equipment or injure anybody en route. When you arrive on scene, park your vehicle at a safe, appropriate location that gives you easy access to get your equipment out and to get the patient in. Sometimes it's blocking traffic in order to do that. With traffic blocked, we tend to like to park beyond the accident so that you're loading in the back of the ambulance more easily than you are if you were in front of it. So hopefully, traffic has stopped and you don't have that issue. Sometimes they'll divert traffic, sometimes they'll close a lane and continue that flow of traffic. So it just kind of depends on the needs there. Sometimes you have to park your vehicle far away from something because it's in a remote area. Think about what you need to pack in, because you're always going to have to pack that information, that equipment back out. Biggest thing, arrival at the scene, is providing patient care. Let's see if we can get this to play this time. So it's showing that he goes past the vehicle. This one, it's a rough terrain, so he's parked at a far distance, upwind, obviously uphill. Then he has to think about, he or she has to think about what equipment that they need to pack down to be able to bring that patient back up. Do they need other resources? Maybe the scene's not safe yet. So a few things to think about in parking your vehicle. I'm glad it played for us this time. Then you transfer that care of the patient to somebody else. So if you provided first response and then an ambulance shows up and you're not expected to hop in that ambulance, then you're going to give them a brief verbal report, maybe something that you already have on paper that you can write down real quick, as much information as you have so that they have something to continue on. If you are transporting, then you'll think about transferring the care of that patient to somebody at a hospital. So maybe the nurse or physician at the receiving hospital that you're going to. And have, again, a nice, verbal exchange of information as well as that written document that you're going to leave there with them. A lot of them are computerized now. Post-run activities, complete your paperwork, whether it be handwritten or computerized. A lot of times when you submit that, then it'll get faxed or somehow delivered to the receiving hospital where you're taking it to. Gather your equipment, clean it. Think about how your next patient would want to lay in somebody else's blood or whatever. So wipe everything down, not only cleaning it but disinfecting it so you don't grow any organisms. And replace anything that you need. You get back, restock that ambulance. And any other duties that you have, notify dispatch that now you're available and you're back in quarters or what have you. So air transport, air ambulances typically are used, especially in remote areas, by helicopters. We call rotor wing versus fixed wing. Fixed wing have to land at an airport, and rotor wing do not. So it's good that you have this available, several services available in all of South Texas to transport patients. A lot of them, you need to know their capabilities. Will they transport one patient? Will they transport two? And what other resources that they have. They typically have several advantages. They can respond quickly, whereas ground ambulance may get stuck by traffic or have longer distance, or maybe it's a very remote area. Typically carry specialized equipment, and oftentimes you'll see that their skills and their capabilities tend to be a little bit higher than paramedics on ground ambulance. So most helicopter services have a flight nurse and a flight medic, and along with the pilot. But their big limitation is bad weather. If their ceiling is too low for visibility, they're not flying. If the wind is too high, they're not flying. Yeah, of course, if there's thunderstorms, thunder and lightning, hail, they're not flying. So that's kind of a big disadvantage there. If your system uses a helicopter, make sure that you get in coordination with this ahead of time with these agencies and know what their expectations are. A big thing is setting up an orientation session. We call it a landing zone course, and it's really quick. It's just expectations of what they expect to keep you safe, probably primarily, and then what kind of patients qualify for a helicopter transport. You know, somebody that has an ingrown toenail and it really, really hurts, obviously is not a candidate for a helicopter, but somebody with maybe a heart attack or a motor vehicle crash and, they are critical, that definitely would be a patient that would qualify for that. So you have to think about, where does this patient need to go for what we call definitive care? If it's a level 1 trauma center and the time that it takes to get there, they could deteriorate, then by all means they need to go there. If it's a cardiac or a stroke center and the time that it takes to get there by ground, they would deteriorate, then by all means that they need to go there. So helicopters can be dangerous to untrained personnel. Those main rotor, the main one at the top, we can talk about the tail rotor in a minute, spins at 300 revolutions per minute, and those rotor wings actually dip down. They can dip down to as low as just 4 feet above the ground. So when you're approaching, and if you have advanced life support personnel and they've started IVs, you don't need to hold the bag really high over your head. You could lose an arm that way. So everybody needs to stay as close to the ground as they can if you have a helicopter that lands and you're loading a patient in what we call a hot land. They keep the rotor wing at full speed. Never, ever, never, ever, never go to the tail of the helicopter when that tail rotor is spinning. It not only is invisible, it actually it's like a hypnotic thing. It mesmerizes you and makes you want to walk towards it. I don't know why. So we always stay in the front half of the helicopter towards the front, never toward the back. It also generates a lot of wind, so anything that's loose is going to blow away. That sheet on the patient, we tend to put the sheet under them and roll them up like a little taco and then put the belts on tight. That way the sheet's not going to blow away. If you put it on top, even if you have the straps on, when you get moving the patient off of your stretcher, even though they're on the backboard, there may be a strap that holds that sheet down, and once you do that, the sheet's up in that main rotor. It can cause some damage to the helicopter, so we have to be real careful with that. I like this picture. It shows a helicopter stopped. There's no movement of their wings at all, but they still approach from the front. So they have this landing zone set up, and most of them are a minimum of 100 feet by 100 feet. The helicopter pilots really like 100 feet by 300 feet, which is a football field. They really love that, because then they can turn and land into the wind and take off into the wind. They're going to get more lift that way. Landing zone should be as flat as possible and free of debris. So anything that could be blown around needs to be removed. You have to look up and make sure there's no power lines. From the ground, power lines are easy to see. From the air, they're impossible to see. So if you're landing a helicopter on a highway, you can take a orange, it doesn't really matter, but you could take an orange can of spray paint, but whatever color, and place a big X, just huge X in the middle of the highway. Make sure it's level. but you have to look around at the poles and say there is no power lines around here that helicopter could catch. Those wires are really important, almost next to impossible to see from the air. Avoid using flags and flashing lights and cones and things like that. All that's going to do is blow away. That's why that big X is really good. At night, if you have a nice field and it's, trimmed down, it's not real brushy or anything, you can take 4 vehicles and turn on the lights and put 4 vehicles at the corner of that landing zone as far away as you can, and those lights will all cross in the middle, and the helicopter knows that's where he or she is supposed to land. Loading patients into the helicopter. So when you're approaching from the front, the pilot will stay in the helicopter. The pilot doesn't get out. You make eye contact with the pilot, and they will motion you to come forward. When they do, you go forward. You don't go until they see you. And that's with whether the helicopter rotors are moving or not. Securing everything is good. You do get some debris flown up, so wear eye protection if you have it all possible, hearing protection, and then stay nice and low. Nothing needs to go above your head. The crew's always going to give you instructions on how to safely approach the helicopter, how to load, but once you get up under, if that helicopter's got what we call a hot land, the rotor wings are still going, it's next to impossible to hear, so it's a lot of hand gestures and such. So proper equipment that you need to think about in your jump bag or your first aid kit. There was a nice list in there, and that's not all inclusive. You may kind of exchange some things out, maybe some more ice packs, those commercial ice packs in the summertime than what it said there. Be familiar with the 6 phases of the emergency call and think about each step along the way. And a little bit of a review. Which of the following is not one of the phases of an EMR call? Arrival at the scene, post-run activities, scheduling for upcoming shifts, and preparation. So even though scheduling is part of preparation, it wasn't really one of the steps that we talked about. That's more of an administrative role. Information from dispatch should include all of the following except number of patients, nature of call, nearest hospital, callback number. And of all those we talked about, we never mentioned nearest hospital, so except would be nearest hospital. That's up for the crew to decide what's in the best interest of that patient and where they need to go. Will a regular level 4 trauma center take care of the needs of that patient? When approaching a helicopter, you should always approach from the rear. We said that's where the tail rotor is. That's not a good idea. Always approach from the front. We did say that. And there's very few test questions that you'll see where always and never are the correct answers, except for this one. Attempt to move the patient to the aircraft as soon as it lands. No, that's where you're going to wait for communication from the pilot and that hand signal for you to come forward. And you should have eye protection, so D would be incorrect. Always approach from the front. Correct answer on this nice little short chapter, transport operations.